This podcast is brought to you by Tethered. One of the challenges for me in all my gear and what I take with me is always trying to stay public land legal. And what I mean by this is a lot of times when you're hanging gear, the only way or the most common way is to use some type of screw-in mechanism. In the past, I started making tethers out of paracord that I could hang stuff on in the tree. That way I wasn't having to screw anything into the tree and so forth. But Tethered up their game as they always do and thought of the public land mobile hunter and their needs. And they've come out with the Hiss strap, which I recently started using, which is a 7-foot long piece of webbing that is daisy chained. And it also pairs nicely with their Hiss Pro Pack, which is a combination of some S-beaners as well as a pro clip. And so I hang everything from my bow to my backpack to binos to rangefinder, whatever the case is that I'm bringing into the tree with me. I use this Hiss strap for that and those various carabiners and S hooks. So if you want to learn more about either the Hiss strap or the Hiss Pro Pack, or do you want to learn about their saddle and predator platform setup, head to tetherednation.com and check them out. First thing I do in the morning before a hunt is, of course, I have to have my morning coffee, and I'm sure most of you out there probably feel the same. Make sure you're filling your mug with Skull Brew coffee, as it is the only coffee company that is both 2% for conservation certified and, of course, donates 10% of their profits to conservation organizations who are helping us to secure the future of our wild places. So head to skullbrewcoffee.com and choose between 3 kilo roasts of coffee and know that you are supporting conservation with every sip. All right. Happy Wednesday to all of you out there. Hope you're doing well. Hope some of you had a chance to wrap a tag around a nice whitetail here, since we had this nice cold front come through for the statewide opener in PA. As most of you know, I've been in the timber for a few weeks now with the special regs opening here in the area that I live in. But I was waiting with bated breath for this cold front to come through, and actually took a half day on Friday to get out and try to get some extra timber time in, which was good. I ended up hitting the swamp. I headed back into there. I was really kind of just looking to see if I couldn't fill the freezer with some freezer meat. Had an opportunity, but unfortunately the opportunity came through at last light. I was losing light. A doe came rolling through. She hit the small opening that I had to try to take a shot, and as soon as she hit that opening, she turned hard left and gave me a really hard quartering away shot. And the fact that I didn't have a ton of light, and it was going to be a tough shot to begin with, I was at full draw and let down because I just didn't want to make a questionable shot. And I thought it better that I just kind of leave the place, non-disturbed, if you will, rather than take a questionable shot and have to spend a lot of time, traipsing through there, probably, an extensive track job. And that, and just first and foremost, in my opinion, it was a questionably ethical shot to take in the first place. So I thought better of it, drew down, and lived to let her live to hunt another day. And then was really kind of excited for this past Saturday, which, was having a really nice temp drop. I think the high on Saturday was maybe 61, and it was going to be about 42 or 39 to 42 degrees. I don't remember exactly what it was Saturday morning. And my plan was, I had a north wind, and my plan was to get back in the one area where I had the one deer on camera that was giving me some morning activity and some opportunities. He was showing himself and shooting light in the morning in this particular area. And so I had some really high hopes headed into that hunt. Got in there, again, super quiet, stealthy. It was a piece of public land. Set up, I couldn't have made a better entrance. Didn't make a stinking sound or a single peep during the entrance, and getting all set up and stuff, and did not see a single deer. Now that's not surprising to me. This, where I'm set up, I'm probably either going to see the one I'm looking for, or I'm probably not going to see anything. But then I don't know. It was probably a little after first light. I think sunrise was right around 6:56. Close to 7 o'clock, something like that. And it was shortly thereafter I heard a ripping grunt behind me over my right shoulder, and it was probably anywhere from like 50 to 75 yards away ish, which was cool. The deer were definitely fired up. And then this time of year, there's a lot of, nuts and stuff falling out of the tree. And so I kept kind of hearing stuff crashing into the ground, which, there were squirrels jumping from branch to branch and stuff like that, and knocking nuts out of the tree and stuff like that. And I heard some of that going on. And then where that grunt came from in that general area, I kind of heard similar stuff going on. But I heard stuff that I thought was more than just more than squirrels messing around. Like, you spend some time in the woods. It's always hard this time of year because my senses aren't all tuned in necessarily, as far as like knowing what I'm hearing, being able to distinguish between squirrels messing around and something that might hear like it sound like a deer, or whatever the case is. And even visually too, it always takes me a few hunts to kind of get my eyes retrained to pick out like the smallest movements and stuff like that will be a deer in the distance, kind of, going through the brush or through the timber or whatever. And so I kept listening, then all of a sudden I heard the distinct sound of antlers hit one another. And so there was some, I wouldn't say it was aggressive by any means, but there was some gentle sparring happening in that general area. And then I heard another grunt, which got a little further away, but it sounded the same. So it sounded like it was the same deer. And then, maybe 30 minutes later, I now had him on the right, still on my right-hand side, which technically would have been my east, and just a little north. So he was a little northeast of me. And then I didn't hear anything. Pretty deep grunt. So, look, I'm not a grunt expert by any stretch of the imagination, but it definitely wasn't a doe bleat. It was definitely sounded like a buck. Was it the one I was after? Who knows? I can say he is one of 3 deer that have been using that general area that I have on camera, and I know for certain that one of the deer that had been coming through there, he was an up and coming 8-point that I had on camera. I know that he got killed. I saw on social media that he was killed a couple days ago on that particular public land piece. So the 2 other shooters were still in that area. So was it him? I don't know. Do I think it was him? If I had to guess, I would say, maybe 60% certainty it was him, or maybe the other shooter. But needless to say, he didn't come through, and I ended up getting down probably around, 9:30 or so. And then I just put on a scout to kind of see if there was any new sign that was laid down, any hot sign I could maybe, set up on for the evening. And so I made a quick scout through, and I ended up finding one area that I think I want to set up on at some point. It'll probably be an evening hunt. I don't think I would hunt this area in the morning in October here, only because I don't know what time deer might be traveling through there. But there's one area on this property that, there's a few acorns that have been dropping like on the property as I was scouting, but nothing really significant. Kind of small acorns too. And I don't know. And again, I'm not an acorn expert, but it looked kind of what I'd say is young or juvenile. Maybe it's a tree that's getting its first crop on, or its second crop on, or whatever. But in the one corner of the property, there are some sizable acorns that are dropping, and a lot of them. And it's in this one kind of concentrated area. And it's not surprisingly where I had found a bunch of sign when I scouted it this past spring, a bunch of old rubs and stuff there. So I went to that area and was looking around. There weren't any new rubs that were laid down. There weren't any scrapes along that area. It's along the edge of a swamp, so there's an edge there. So I anticipate there's going to be, deer movement in that general area to begin with, just because of the edge and the sign that I'd seen from previous years. So I think my plan will try to, see if I can get the right wind. And there, it's like I'm probably going to need some type of west wind to hunt that, so my scent's blowing into the swamp. And they actually would be able to scent check almost that entire property, because that would be, or at least that piece of it, because the wind would be kind of covering the entire one side of the property, blowing toward the east. So I think that that's my plan for that setup. Is I might try to put a hunt on there in the evening, and then Saturday evening I went out. I was back to the swamp because I had a good wind for that. And I think I kind of started figuring out why I'm not getting as much, camera activity there. I did a little drive around because there was a bean field, or I'm sorry, there's a couple fields around there that last year didn't have anything in it. It was all just either, they were hay fields essentially. When I say didn't have anything in it, then I mean they didn't have any, cash ag crops. There was no corn, there was no beans or anything like that in it. And then this field, the one, when I say large field, it's large for this area because remember I'm kind of in a suburban area. The field's maybe 20, I think it was 24 acres whenever I, edged it on Onyx just to kind of see how big it is. And this year it's in corn and it's still standing. So, and this is maybe, if you go to the back corner of the swamp before you get to private, you're like 400 yards away from that cornfield. And all the movement I've been seeing on the camera has been different than what it was last year, where most of them were kind of paralleling the entire property. This year they're moving, what would be east and west, and heading to the west, which is where the corn is at. So I think that that's kind of changed some things up. Are there some bucks that are kind of hanging out in that corn and maybe close by to that corn? I don't know, but that's different than what was in there last year. So, I'm just trying to dissect and figure out what might be changing. So I might have to traipse and head back into that corner And that might be where I start to see some sign and stuff like that, because there's not a ton of sign necessarily in the swamp right now, which is a little unusual compared to last year. There were some rubs and stuff laid down. Never a ton of scrapes. I think predominantly because it's pretty wet in most areas, and I don't know that the scrapes would last very long if they were laid down. That being said, there is one corner in the first transition of this swamp where I saw a bunch of rubs pop up last year, and that in that corner, I started making a video and I ran out of juice to finish the video. But there was when I was going through there checking cameras a couple weeks ago, I was just kind of doing another walkthrough and seeing if there was anything new that has changed or anything new that I missed or didn't see last year, and I found a buck bed, and it's in this one corner of the swamp where I kind of anticipated if I were a buck, where would I stay, and that was where I kind of thought, a buck might be bedded, and sure enough, there was a bed. Now, it wasn't in the swamp; it was right on the edge of it. So then it kind of got me to thinking. I was like, this past year, last year, the other thing that was different from last year is I think last year we had a really wet spring and entire summer, and even into the fall, it rained like crazy last year, more than I can ever remember in my life. This year we had a really wet spring and a wet partial summer, and then really the past like month or so, it's really dried up, and we haven't really had a whole lot of rain, and we had some late hot days in September and stuff. And so I was hiking in to hunt yesterday, and just wanted to kind of, as I was hiking in, I was kind of still hunting slash scouting, my way through till I got to where I wanted to set up. And I was walking toward where this bed was, because I was like, if I see sign that had been laid down, then I know it's been laid down like in the past like week, and if that's the case near this bed, then I was just going to set up and hunt there. And there was nothing there. And I was pushing the envelope, getting kind of close, and sure enough, I heard something jump, boom. I saw all the brush shake in the swamp, and I'm set on, almost certain that it was a buck. I don't know the caliber. I didn't see it, but it was a single deer that was bedded in the swamp. And so, I kind of took a page from, my conversations in the past with old Zach from the hunting public, and, that you'd never want to bump a buck. It's, not your ideal situation, but that's the best intel that you ever get, because you know where he was when he was there, what wind, and it's real intelligence. It's first person intelligence. So, as bad as it might have seemed that I bumped him out of there, I decided to kind of walk back into where his bed was at. And because the swamp has receded a little bit because of all the drier weather we have, there are some prime bedding spots that are closer to the edge of that swamp, where last year it would have pushed the deer further in and they would have had to travel on the edge of the swamp. Where this year, once I got in there, I found he had two beds that were in there. And then when I started walking around just a little bit on the edge, there's almost like a secondary trail system that runs inside of that swamp, right along the edge of it, where the water has receded back because we haven't had a whole lot of rain the past, 4 weeks or so. And so I think part of the reason why I'm also not getting intel on cameras in there is because, all things being equal, they're staying in the cover to travel. Not only that, there's plenty of browse in there for them, so they never really have to get up and get out of that stuff to find food until after dark, and they can travel pretty much the entire length of that property in that thick, nasty stuff. So that was a big learning piece for me yesterday. So I'm thinking about my hunts coming up. I think that, if it stays dry, I think I'm going to try to hunt that bed, the bed that I found yesterday, knowing that, he's probably, whatever deer's in there, it might be a forky, who knows. But I'm going to probably hunt close to that bed, or I'm going to have to kind of change my setup from last year, where I was hunting, a trail system that they were using that was a little on the edge of the swamp where I could get shot opportunities. I feel like now I'm going to have to kind of move and press the envelope a little bit and get a little further into the swamp and set up to get my opportunities, because truthfully, that's kind of, even the does that I'd seen, that's been where I've seen them. They've been hanging much closer in the brush than they had last year. And so I ended up making my way to my tree at the end of all of that, and got set up, and then did have an opportunity at a doe. And it's a blessing and a curse. This piece has, it's close to a road, and there's some houses nearby, and there was someone running a generator at their house, and there was still some road noise and stuff like that. So you can get away with a little bit of noise in this particular piece while you're in your stand, because you're always going to have a little bit of ambient noise around you. And that's what I had yesterday. And so I had this doe at like 23 yards, and she passed through this. I had a small window where I could take a shot, and I was at full draw. I think it was for over a minute that I was holding full draw because she was moving, and then she stopped and browsed, and then when she finally hit the opening, I mouth bleated at her, and she never heard me. And I literally had that small window to stop her, and she didn't stop and started quartering away, and that was it. So I've had two opportunities to fill the freezer with some freezer meat, and just couldn't quite get it done. And then, even though, look, this weekend I was at, full draw twice on two different does, and heard, what might be the buck that I was after, doing some grunting and some sparring Saturday morning. And then I heard this super deep kind of guttural uh, uh, grunt while I was in the swamp, and it was right around I don't know, probably 6 o'clock ish. And I mean, it was noticeable. It was one of those ones where you stop and you take notice. Like, it wasn't like, oh, there's just, some deer over there, some young deer. It was like, no, listen to me. And then maybe 5 minutes later, there's this little spike that come out, from, I guess it would be the south of the swamp, exactly from where I heard that grunt. And there was no way that young deer made that sound. And he came in all mousy, ears were back, really kind of checking things out. I had a great wind, so there was no way he was catching me at all. And he was actually coming in below where I came in, so he wasn't catching my ground scent or anything. And he worked his way in super mousy, and then he stopped like right in front of me, right in front of my stand, or right in front of the tree that I was in, and milled around there for a little bit. Then he walked back to where he came from, and then kind of looped around and went behind me and went off. And as he was moving off, I heard the grunt yet again. So I don't know if maybe that was the deer that I kicked up and he ended up going back to bed. Maybe I should have tried the old DeQuisto bump and dump and maybe would have got it done. Who knows? But that was essentially the end of the night. So I filmed him for a little while. He moved on. Then I got down and moved out and didn't bump any deer. And then I've had it happen a couple times this year already. It was like the gods raining down upon me again, and it rained today, so should wash everything away that had been laid down. And I got a cell camera picture of deer moving at like 10:30 today. So obviously my existence in there or my hunt in there has done nothing to deter the deer. It's as if I'd never been there. And then I got a nice rain today that kind of took care of any remnants from me hiking in and out. So that was basically my hunts over the course of the weekend. Weather looks decent this week. Hopefully I'll be able to get out for maybe a morning or two. I got some work travel going on, so I don't know that I'll be able to, but I only have a few short weeks and a handful of hunts more here in Pennsylvania in October to try to make something happen. And then I'll be on my way to Iowa. But that's pretty much my whitetail update for this week. And we'll get going to the show here. So have a cool show for you today. This is the third installment, part number 3 of my conversation with Don Higgins. And what you've heard previously, if you've listened to the previous 2 DIY reports I did with him, if you haven't, I'd go back and check those out. But we did his postseason and his preseason kind of approach to killing big deer. Don is very methodical, very detail-oriented guy, especially when it comes to deer hunting, and probably just in general in all aspects of his life. But in this particular instance, as it applies to him hunting whitetails. And this section here, we actually dive into his approach during the season, because I'm always interested in what guys do that are good at getting on deer, consistently, how they kind of approach their season, how adaptable are they, how beholden to a plan are they, and just the small things that they pick up on while they're hunting that tell them, when to make a move, when to kind of play it cool, and just all those kinds of things. So that's what I talked to Don about during this session, and he, of course, shares a bunch of great info as he always does. So as always, thank you all for listening, and I hope you guys enjoy. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And this is the third and final installment with our good friend, Mr. Don Higgins. How you doing, sir?
Great. How are you?
Well, I'm good, man. I'm hanging in there. We're hanging tough. We're talking. How could I'm having a great night. I'm talking deer with Don Higgins. So I don't know that my night could get much better than that.
Well, I'm always ready to talk deer.
Right? That's for sure, man. I always enjoy running into you, whether it's at a trade show or on the podcast or whatever. You always have you're never at a shortage for information whenever it comes to deer hunting, just about most any other topic, which is why I always enjoy talking to you. But I know. So this session we're going to be talking about your approach to getting after a good deer during the actual season. So far we've gone through what you like to do directly after the season, the postseason, those winter months. We've talked, most recently about what you like to do in that late spring, early summer, kind of how you're using cameras during that time of year, some mock scrapes and so forth. And now we're transitioning into, the time of year is here. Deer season is here. We're all excited about it, which is just around the corner for us now. But first question is I want to get an understanding, I guess, is, you're hunting a certain caliber of deer, that is, that's a mature deer and, in many instances, world-class type whitetails. And I want to get a sense from you, how much intel do you like to have on a deer before you feel comfortable making a move on him? I know you play the long game. We talked about this, that you like to look at trail camera data over the course of several years, and you'd mentioned that you'll probably know a deer for at least 2 years, if not more, when you decide to hunt him. But what types of things are you particularly looking for that tells you, okay, the time is right now for me to go kill this deer?
Well, mainly information I've gathered from previous seasons.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a pretty good idea of where they're going to be during each stage of the season, before they're mature or at least on the hit list. So, most of the bucks I'm targeting are 6.5 years old. And I've watched what they've done when they was 4.5 to 5.5. So I know what they're going to do when they're 6.5.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just sitting there waiting for it to happen. Instead of being a step behind, I'm prepared and I'm going to be sitting there waiting on it.
So I wanted to ask you this before, and it kind of slipped my mind. But, when I'm talking with you, we're talking like the upper echelon of mature deer. When you say 6.5 years old, it's like there's a lot of folks out there, whether it's my home state in PA or whether it's in Michigan, or I'd say for a lot of places, really, 6.5-year-old deer they might not ever see. So that's kind of a unicorn for many of us. But is there something that you notice, say when a deer goes from 3.5 to 4.5 and, starts to become a mature deer, do you notice something in their behavior overall whenever they make that transition from, a regular buck to a mature buck? And what are those behavior differences that you kind of recognize?
Yeah, and I've said for quite a few years now that if I can get a buck, I start watching when they're young through trail camera pictures and such. And if I can get one that I've got interest in, if he can survive gun season as a 3.5-year-old,
mm-hmm.
then he's got a good chance to make it to 6.5.
Mm-hmm.
And I just base that on past experience because I've watched a lot of good 3.5-year-olds get shot.
Right.
But most of the time, when I'm watching a buck and he's 4.5, most of them are going to make it to 5.5. And if I'm watching them at 5.5, most of them are going to make it to 6.5.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what it is, when they're 3.5 years old, they've got big enough at that point. They're almost like a guy in his 20s. He's physically he's mature. He can hold his own with guys of about any age.
Right.
But he don't quite have the mental capacity yet.
Right.
The maturity. So a 3.5-year-old buck can go somewhere and be the top dog.
Mm-hmm.
In most parts of the country. And it might just be a little woodlot here or there or something, but he'll go somewhere where he's the top dog. And a lot of times, and he feels confident, he's overconfident, like a 20-year-old.
Right.
Thinking he's 10 feet tall and bulletproof.
Right.
And it costs a lot of them their lives. And it's that's the jump between 3.5 and 4.5. If they survive it, that's when they become a totally different animal.
So I know that we talked a little bit about details earlier, in an earlier podcast. Where you were talking about taking notes in the stand, and that's during hunting seasons when you really start to think about tweaking your setups and stuff like that. Are you also taking notes on say you have a 3.5-year-old that is an up and comer that if he makes it through this year, just like you said, like there's a good chance he's going to make it a couple more years, and that deer, if he makes it another year to 2 years, he's going to make your list because he's just that caliber. Do you also take notes on different personality traits and behavior that you see when you get to see them on the hoof at that age range? Just so you start to get a, like a profile on that deer of, this deer is aggressive, or this deer comes in timid, or, whatever the case, whatever the personality trait of the deer is. Do you take notes of those things too? So you kind of have a really good bead, not just on their behavior of how they want to travel and so forth, but also how they might act when they approach your setup. That way you kind of judge their body language and stuff during the shot opportunity.
Yeah, I do take note of those things, but what's even more important is how a buck traverses across a property, a specific property, because one buck he may come through a particular property and he wants to use this path or this route,
Mm-hmm.
and another mature buck he uses a totally different route coming through, and I noticed that with my trail cameras that I can have two trail cameras just 100 yards apart, and I'm getting pictures of totally different bucks that I don't get on the other camera. So what I'm really noting is how that buck traverses the property where I plan to kill him. And, that helps me get my stands in place and get them in the right place and ready ahead of the hunt.
Mm-hmm. Are you noticing in in that example, the deer that are the two cameras that are 100 yards apart, are you noticing that one camera's picking up more mature deer and one camera's picking up more juvenile deer? And is there something that's, driving that difference, do you think?
Well, I wouldn't say I've noticed that so much,
Mm-hmm.
as much as I've just noticed that different bucks will travel through the same area and do so differently.
Okay.
And I really don't have an explanation for it because it doesn't seem to matter what the wind direction is when buck number one comes through the property. I'm going to catch his picture here. When buck number two comes through, I'm going to get his picture over there.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't been able to put a finger on why. It's just that if I want to target one of those bucks, I know that I can't be, if I want to target buck number one, I can't be where buck number two's coming through because that's not the route that he uses.
Right. Okay. So, I know we'll use this camera, I guess, situation here as I guess a data point here, maybe for this next question. So I know we've talked about the fact that you have a lot of stands that are, are set, and trees that are prepared, and ready to roll. And I know John in an earlier podcast asked you, if you will do some run and gun type of stuff. And he had talked about it in the sense of if you know that maybe you can make a move, and get on one of your target deer, the guy that you're trying to put on the ground, will you use a run and gun set? And you said, yeah, you have some of those that you might do, but you do try to avoid them. So this question is a little bit different though. It's like, so you have all your inventory of your deer and you have your target deer kind of picked out for the year, if you will. If there's a deer, and I know that your properties that you hunt like the back of your hand, and so I don't know that this would ever necessarily occur. So this might be a hypothetical, but if a deer showed up that was the caliber of deer that just basically trumped all the other deer that you were chasing that year, and you thought you had a chance to get on him, would you make a move on that deer? And if so, how would you go about it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, if a giant shows up, I'm going after him.
Right.
And it's like Trump, I didn't pay much attention to Trump until he was 6.5 years old.
Really?
Because he just wasn't big enough to interest me. And then when he went from 5.5 to 6.5, he put on 30-some inches, and all of a sudden he's in the 190s, and boom, the chase is on, and I don't know anything about him because he would relocate. I get his picture every summer in velvet, but he would relocate in the fall, and I had no idea where he went. But as soon as he exploded, the chase was on, and I would do the same with any buck that come along. I'm trying to chase the biggest bucks I can find. And,
right.
Age is an important part of that equation, but if a 3 or 4 year old, I'm not going to shoot a 3-year-old, but if a 4-year-old comes along that's over 200 inches, well, I'm chasing him.
Right. So say this new player shows up, and maybe you've got a little bit of intel on him, and let's say maybe you don't, right? Maybe just this is a random buck that just shows up. How are you doing? I guess I'll just ask it plainly. Like, how are you getting on this deer? And let's just take the scenario that you have limited information. Maybe you haven't known the deer for 2 years or so. Maybe this guy, you got pictures of him maybe early in the year, and then all of a sudden he shows up during hunting season, and you're just noticing that you're either getting him on camera, or you're seeing him while you're in the tree at like 70, 80 yards or 90 yards, where you're going to have to make a move. How do you kind of start to close the distance on him?
Well, I'm going to hunt him on that property. To start with, I'm going to base my stand locations on what other mature bucks in the past have done on that property. Okay. And I just mentioned that some of them will traverse a property different than others. Mm-hmm. But there's some generalities. A good funnel is a good funnel. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to use experience on that property with past mature bucks just to start the ball rolling anyway.
Right. Do you find, and this is not necessarily during the season topic, but do you find a mature buck terrain feature, let's say, we'll just call it that, is always will typically be a mature buck terrain feature? So what I mean by that is, like, if you have, let's say you have a really, like, a small low spot in a field, right, that maybe there's a larger low spot in the field that majority of the juveniles and does and come out of, right? And say there's a smaller, less defined, field saddle type thing, right? And mature bucks that you notice are using that. Do you feel like in order to stay away from the social pressure and stuff like that, but to still get the thermal advantage entering that field, they'll mature bucks will continue to use that one terrain feature over and over again, regardless of if one gets killed, another one will start to use it just the same?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's very common for generation after generation of mature bucks to traverse a property the same way. But, what I was referring to earlier was subtle differences. Mm-hmm. There may be a hardwood ridge or something where one buck, travels down it on one side, but another one does on the other. But when you start getting to those pinch points and such, most of them are coming through there.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So I want to transition here and talk a little bit of like tactic and approach kind of scenario. So let's take early season tactics and approach. How does, for you, for Don Higgins hunting a mature deer, how does your early season approach differ from your rut approach? And those two yet differ from your late season approach? Or are there some things that you do in each that are pretty, or are similar? And what are the things that are in each part of the season that are drastically different?
Well, during the early season, I'm hunting food sources, but I want to hunt close to the bedding cover too. I mean, if you've got thick bedding cover that comes right to the food source, I mean, that's where you want to be. You want to get as close to that bedded buck as possible without busting him. Mm-hmm. And the closer you can be to where he's bedded, the better your odds of success. And the key is a wind direction, that'll allow you to do that and not be detected. Mm-hmm. During the rut, I love the downwind edge of thick bedding areas. Okay. The bucks just love to run those downwind edges of thick bedding areas. And forget the sign, just get on the downwind edge. Mm-hmm. That's what I do during the rut. During the late season, it's all geared towards food and weather. I want to be close to those hot food sources that are undisturbed as far as hunting pressure goes. I want to hunt them afternoons only. And I want to do it when the weather's at its absolute worst.
Right. I remember we were talking about that one other time before, where you had said you want the nasty freezing rain, minus temperatures, blowing, like most of the days that no one else wants to be out, are the days you want to be in.
The worse it is, the better it is.
Right. Now, what about, how do you feel about scrapes and hunting scrapes? I mean, do you ever set up on those, or are you usually always steering kind of clear of those areas, and maybe you're hunting a terrain feature that's near like a primary scrape area? What's your kind of hunting approach with scrapes?
I hunted scrapes a lot in years past and never had a whole lot of luck.
Mm-hmm.
Once I forgot about the sign and started hunting terrain and the wind, my success skyrocketed. That doesn't mean that scrape is a bad idea. Myself.
All right, folks. Sorry about that. We had a little technical difficulty here. Things were running too smoothly. It was bound to have a hiccup here. So, but we're jumping back in here with Don Higgins. The next question, Don, I wanted to ask you was, what I was starting to ask was around the October lull, or the that time period. I know there's a lot of debate, a lot of conversation people have around whether the lull is actually real. Whether it's just more so food sources are changing, because scientific data seems to suggest that deer ramp up their movement throughout the course of the year, beginning, late summerish. So what are your thoughts on the October lull, fact or fiction, and how do you hunt that time of year?
Well, I have a hard time buying it simply because I've killed probably at least a half a dozen good bucks in mid-October.
Right.
And Smokey and Trump 2 years ago are perfect examples. I shot Smokey on October 15th and Trump on the 19th. And I've shot, I think I've shot 3 different bucks on October 15th. Good ones.
Wow.
So I have a hard time buying them. My theory is that a lot, in most states, or a lot of states, archery season opens about the 1st of October. Or at least it does in my home state of Illinois, and I know several others. So, the 1st of October, guys are getting out there hunting, and they're starting to put some pressure on their property. And a couple of weeks in, they've hunted a few times, and I think they pressured their stands and they pressured their hunting areas, and the deer get onto them a little bit. Well, then, so they shift gears, maybe move their stands or have other stands. They start hunting around the rut. They start seeing those deer again. I know that's not 100% all of it, but I think that is one factor. And then you've got food sources changing where, maybe crops get harvested and acorns start dropping, things like that. So the deer change their patterns a little bit in mid-October.
Right. So what about, a lot of guys will
think that there's too much to it.
Right. So a lot of guys will avoid morning hunts in October as well. Will you hunt mornings, or are you more of an evening hunter during the month of October?
I never hunt mornings in October.
No.
Never. And I haven't hunted an October morning, and I take that back. I was trying to do things different with Trump, just because he was such a tough buck, that I did hunt one morning in October when I was after him, but that's probably the only morning in October that I've hunted in 15 years.
Right. Now, what about, I know for late season you like the nasty weather. We talked about that, and I think even on the last podcast we did almost a year ago, we really talked a lot about late season with you. For let's just say the normal duration of the year minus late season. What weather conditions, or I guess what's the hierarchy or priority of weather conditions that you feel most confident in going into a hunt? Do you prioritize? Of course, wind direction is paramount, but is there a wind speed that you like? Is there a barometric pressure point that you like? What are those things that you kind of factor in?
Well, I just like temperatures that are cooler than normal. If you can get temperatures that are 10 to 20 degrees below normal for that time of year, no matter if it's the 1st of October or the middle of January, it increases deer movement. So, you don't want it too cold. You don't want it brutal cold. There's been a couple of years I can remember where during the middle of the rut in November, we got brutal cold temperatures, snow and ice and everything else, where the temperature was way below what it normally would be, and it just holds the deer up. But if you can get something around 10 to 20 degrees below normal for that time of year, that really increases deer movement.
Yeah. Now, do you like a certain wind speed? I know a lot of guys don't like they want a 10 to 15 mile per hour. They don't want 5. They don't want a super calm day. They want a little bit of something. How do you feel about that?
I'm exactly the same way. If it's too calm, um, you really can't predict which way your scent's blowing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it's just unpredictable. If it's too strong, well, the leaves are rustling, the limbs are blowing, and I don't think the mature bucks feel near as comfortable moving in those conditions. So, about a 10 to 15 mile an hour steady wind.
Yeah. So, and this is, one of so 2 last questions here before we're completely wrapped up with this DIY report, this mini series. One is I wanted to talk to you about this, and I was really looking forward to this, asking you about this. Is I read an article that you wrote where you talked about discipline. And I know earlier on we talked about, your attention to detail, as it's, related to sitting and standing, kind of making sure you're taking notes on everything that's happening. But discipline, as you talked about, as a significant key to the success that really separates those who are hunting good bucks and those who are hunting, the upper echelon mature bucks. So I guess I want to ask, what does discipline mean during the season? Can you give me some examples of what you're kind of referring to?
Yeah, for a number of years, I thought what separated the guys that consistently kill mature bucks from those who just dream about it was passion. I thought the guys that were really passionate did whatever it takes to get it done. But recently, in the last year or so, I've realized that it's not passion. There's a lot of passionate deer hunters that are not consistently killing big deer. It's discipline. Discipline's what separates the guys that are getting it done from the guys that want to. Mm-hmm. Discipline, for example, not hunting a stand when the wind's wrong, or walking a mile out of your way, an extra mile to get to a stand without disturbing deer when you could take a shorter path and take a chance. Mm-hmm. Discipline just causes you to not take chances, I guess.
Right.
Not burn out good stands. Wait for the time to be right. I can remember back when I was not near as disciplined, and my stands are hung, most of them, for specific times of the year. Like I'll have stands that I want to hunt during the early season, some during the rut, some during the late season. And I can remember back my rut stands, I would think, well, one hunt in October is not going to hurt anything. So they were some of my better stands. I wanted to get in at least one hunt in October, and I don't do that anymore. I've become disciplined enough to know that this stand, the best odds of success from this particular stand is during the rut. I'm not going to even go near it in October, no matter what happens. So, right. Discipline just causes you to take that little extra step, and usually it's not. Discipline doesn't cause you to do extra things; it causes you not to do extra things.
Right.
I think there's a lot of things we do in life where the more effort and work you put into it, the bigger the rewards. And hunting mature bucks is not always like that. Sometimes you can, by going the extra mile, can be counterproductive.
Right.
And can actually harm your chances of success. So you got to know, when to move, and then you got to be disciplined enough to wait until the time's right.
Right. I think, and I don't remember if it was you that said this or if it was just in conversation I was having with someone else or where I heard it, but, kind of related to the topic of the idea of discipline, is, if you want to kill more mature deer, and I'm still a work in progress with this, right, is to be disciplined in understanding that in order to kill more mature deer than you've been killing, right, you need to be willing to step outside your comfort zone a little bit. And what I mean by that is, a guy that can kill a 130-inch deer at this one stand location every year will never kill a booner because he wants to sit that stand because he's had success in that stand year over year. And so sometimes success will kind of breed our own complacency. And then we start to, no longer push ourselves to kind of, or remain disciplined in our pursuit of being as good as we can be. What do you kind of think of that approach or that idea?
Yeah, and actually the blog post where I wrote about discipline, I said the same thing. I think what
Might have been
holds
your
a
blog
lot of
post.
deer hunters, yeah, what holds a lot of deer hunters back from making it to the next level is success. They've been so successful doing things the way they're doing it that they just can't change. They just can't break those habits. And if you're happy shooting the bucks, you're shooting fine. That's great. But if you want to take it to the next level, that means you have to do something different than what you're doing now.
Right.
If you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to keep getting what you've been getting. So the success, I fully believe success is what's held a lot of hunters back.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with that. And it was funny because I read that blog post that you had written, and it was, prior to that, I think you put it out sometime. It was either late winter or early spring, and I was in the midst of doing a lot of my scouting and getting a few new public parcels that I wanted to hunt, and started trying to figure them out and stuff because they were all new to me. And it was just kind of the perfect timing for me, honestly, like to have the opportunity to read that, because that was one of the things that I was trying to challenge myself to do. And it's just kind of reinforcing that I was making, good choices as far as like trying to grow as a bow hunter, and making myself step. I mean, I had some parcels I could have continued to hunt, but I was looking for better deer, and I was looking for more opportunities at better deer. And so I was starting to expand, and I was exploring new territories, and and thus far, fingers crossed, I've been rewarded with some decent trail camera pictures that say I might have some decent deer to hunt this year. So, it was that discipline, but then on untethering myself from areas that I had been successful with in the past, so that was a good feel. And hey, I drew an Iowa tag this year too, so that doesn't hurt, right? So
yeah, that ought to help. But yeah. I recently heard a saying that fits perfectly here. It's the greatest enemy of great is good.
Yeah, I hear that. That's
people are good, and it keeps them from being great. They're good, and they get satisfied with good, and it keeps them from being great.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's always a fine line, at least for me, of the pursuit of being. I'm trying to figure out how to say it. Great at the expense of the other things that I cherish, I guess is one way to say
Yep.
it. That's always kind of the balancing act, right? Because I always say, have this saying at work, that I tell people that, put a lot of, look, I like my job, and I'm pretty good at my job, and I enjoy the people I work with, but I always tell people that are, kill themselves at work, I'm like, look, when you're gone, there's nobody going to write on your headstone that you stayed late this week, and missed time with your family or whatever. But your family will remember that, and so I try to take the same approach to hunting, where it's like, I love it. I'm passionate about it. I want to be as good as I can possibly be. My goals are, to be better this year than I was last year. And I figure if I stack years on top of years, maybe one day I'll be, I'll kill a big deer that's, something that people would want to talk about, or whatever the case is. Not that necessarily that I need that or want that, but just as a frame of reference, right? But I also don't want to do that at the expense of my family, and so it's always that balancing act, and that's also discipline though too, right? It's like the more disciplined you are, you hunt smarter, you hunt harder and smarter, you hunt hard and you hunt smarter than you've ever hunted. You can have both of those things, but doing it the hard way, you really probably have to give one or the other up, or give a little of one to get the other. So with that, I have one last question for you, and I'll let you get going and let you get some sleep. But I heard through the grapevine that one of your goals is to kill a booner on public land. Now, I don't want you to give away any of your secrets, but I wanted to get a sense from you how your approach is similar or different from how you go about locating and killing big deer on private land, leased land, your own home farm, versus, how you're approaching the public space.
Well, number one, I've got to be a whole lot more secretive about it.
I was going to say, get a new truck.
Well, having my wife drop me off and things like that.
Right.
There's just no way I can park my truck anymore.
Right.
Locally, and people just know that if they see my truck, I'm hunting a big deer, and it just gets tougher and tougher. So if someone would see my truck in a public parking or a public hunting area parked, well, that would just make it 10 times harder. So
right.
The big thing is I'm going to have to be a whole lot more secretive about it.
Right. Yeah, I totally hear that. So I won't press any harder on it, but I look forward to at one point seeing the pictures of that deer when that does happen, because I got the utmost confidence in you. And
Well,
and
to be honest, I'm not even really pursuing that too hard at the moment. I've got my eye on it. I mean, I've got a couple cameras out on public ground now, and
mm-hmm.
it's going to take the right buck. I'm not just going to go out there and use one of my tags on a borderline buck. If I find a good one, I'll definitely chase him.
Right. Well, I look forward to the day that happens, and I look forward to having you back on to talk about it. So,
well, I hope it happens soon.
Right. Well, there you go. But before I let you get going, Don, if you wouldn't mind, telling folks out there where they can find out more about you, more about the your consulting, and of course your wildlife products as well.
Yeah, my website is HigginsOutdoors.com. You can learn about my consulting. I also do a class on my property. Just started this past spring, but the class is about half indoors and half in the field, where we'll go out and I'll show video footage I've taken right from some of my stands, and then we'll go out and see the stands. You'll see the stands where I've actually shot Boone and Crockett bucks. So, it's one thing to read about it. It's one thing to see it on video, but to go out and stand right under the tree and see where you just watched a booner get shot on video, and then go out and see it, is kind of makes that class unique. I don't think anybody else out there is doing anything like that.
Right.
But you'll see multiple stands where multiple booners have been shot. And then I'm even going to take the show on the road next spring. I haven't even talked about it on any podcast yet, so I guess you get to break the news.
Sweet.
I'm going to offer it's going to be very similar to the class I give at home, except I'm calling it a Whitetail Challenge. And we're going to go to a property, and students are going to, go out, pick out what they think are the 3 best stand sites on the property, and lay it out. And then I'm going to come back and critique what they've done, and then I'm going to reveal exactly what I would do if that was my property and why. They're going to be able to ask questions and get just a firsthand look, a hands-on class, with lessons they can take back to their own properties. So I've got a property in Iowa where that's going to happen. I'm looking for one out east. I want them to be a property that's not just a slam dunk where everybody that looks at it's going to say the same thing. I want it to be the right property. I don't want it too big or too small. I want it to one where everybody that shows up can hopefully learn something. But that's on my website, HigginsOutdoors.com. And then the realworldwildlifeproducts.com is my business that I co-own with West Elks, food plot seed and deer nutrition company. The products that I use on all my own properties. So you can find that on realworldwildlifeproducts.com.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on, Don. You're a class act. I always enjoy talking to you, and I always look forward to the next time that I get a chance to run into you. So until I talk to you next time, have a great deer season. I hope you get on one of those big deer, and I look forward to talking to you soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm willing to do it anytime.
Well, you bet. Thanks, man. All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank Don for joining me, and of course, thank all of you for listening. If you didn't know, Don has a new podcast that just recently came out. It can be found all the usual places that podcasts are found. If you like learning about killing big whitetails from Don Higgins specifically, you're probably going to want to check that out. And also, give any number of his companies, particularly Real World Wildlife Products, give them a check as well online if you're looking for any food plot, mineral, deer feed needs. If you have those needs, be sure to check that out. If you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast while you're there. That'd be super appreciative if you do those 2 things for me. And before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tethered, Exodus Outdoor Gear, Skull Brew Coffee Company, Gumleaf USA Boots, Obsession Bows, Ramcat Broadheads, Trophy Taker Rests, and Dead Downwind. And until next time, we'll see y'all.